at the conference. There were about 20 of us, men and women, most of whom were married. One evening, we found ourselves in a bar. Local men were quite persistent in courting the women from our group. We could hardly contain our smiles as we watched their attempts. One particularly unfortunate approach prompted the comment, "He's lucky I like this beer, otherwise he'd already be carrying it." What if it was a famous football player, let's call him Jocko, who told you this? Would he have scored a goal? Asked another woman. Hell yes. Absolutely. It was unanimous. What if that meant, well, you know? Especially if it meant that. The women laughed sincerely, guys a little tense. Understand that these women weren't the ones who couldn't find a mate. They ranged from pretty cute to downright hot. They were in their late 20s to early 30s and dressed for a night out. What would you tell your husbands? One of the guys timidly asked. Why should I tell my husband? The answer was immediate and caused laughter and nods from the women. What if your husband were here? The guy continued. We could all hear the worry in his voice. One of the women, I think her name was Shannon, leaned forward with her elbows on the table and looked him straight in the eyes. I remembered her from lunch. She showed photographs of her husband and their absolutely adorable 5-year-old daughter. I would tell him that he knows how much I love him and knows that I will always come back to him, but I'm not going to miss this opportunity and I'll see him tomorrow. She spoke calmly and kindly, but with determination. None of us doubted that she was serious. Several guys' jaws dropped. I knew I had to. No, you wouldn't do that, muttered the guy next to me. The woman looked at him with pity. Yes, I would do that, and I think every woman here would do the same. You could go away with him tonight, but if I were your husband, you certainly wouldn't see me tomorrow. He was as serious as she was. Another woman tried to calm the situation. Listen, I love my husband. I wouldn't trade him for anything. Jocko doesn't mean anything to me and never will, and he probably won't even remember my name the next morning. But spending a night with him, just one night in our entire marriage, would be something I could remember for the rest of my life. An event, you know, with a capital C. It would have nothing to do with how I feel about my husband. After that, I would return home to the person I love, and everything would be as before. Ha, I heard Hayden laugh sincerely. I knew his name because he still wore his badge from the conference. I told him about it a long time ago, but he replied that he liked it. With a perverted smile, he asked if I wanted to touch him. I was confused until I heard everyone else laughing and realized he was playing a trick on me. But now, there was something about that laugh that said he wasn't really amused. Do you think I'm lying? Shannon almost barked. Hayden shook his head. I don't know whether you're lying or not. Just trying to figure out who gave you girls the idea that the only thing you bring to a party is your private part. There was a sharp gasp as every woman at the table wanted to be insulted. Sorry, Shannon said. You heard me. He smiled. I didn't come here because I thought I'd sleep with you. I came here to have a drink with you because I enjoy your company. You are all smart, capable, funny, and yes, beautiful. You have so much to offer this world, but somehow, somewhere, someone has given you the idea that who you sleep with is more important than your achievements, your family, your daughter, Shannon. Seriously, are you willing to lose your family for some sex from a stranger you don't even know? She shook her head. I wouldn't have lost my family. Hayden shook his head in response. I would believe you if you could find just one man who would agree with you. Worst month of the year. My wife Linda and I had planned to have a magical Valentine's Day, but the snow ruined those plans. The kids were excited about snow days. Emma and Tommy wanted more, which makes you wonder how terrible first grade and preschool are if your kids act like it's a gulag. I was certainly happy to spend time with my wife and children, but I would have liked a little romance with my wife too. And just when I thought that the whole month would have to be written off, our friend Dee called Linda. Dee and her husband Dave and Phil and his wife Jane were close friends of ours. Dee came up with a great idea. The other couples and I would find babysitters, book rooms at the Four Seasons, have dinner at one of our favorite restaurants, the Madison, and then go dancing at the Morrisons' club, which Dave knew. So, of course, let's save this terrible month. Linda was not a classic beauty, but she had an innate sense of style. Everything she wore not only fit her perfectly, but also reflected her inner world. She put on a blue dress. It made her blue eyes look like they were glowing in the dark. It had long sleeves, a high collar, and a skirt that reached below the knees. The lower part of the skirt flared and barely noticeable swayed when walking, attracting attention. When she danced, it seemed to flirt on its own. The smooth, form-fitting, but not too tight fabric made you want to run your hands over it, hiding and highlighting the slender, feminine figure underneath. Linda smiled as she slowly walked down the stairs where I waited, dazed and open-mouthed. Our company met in a restaurant. We laughed, talked, and enjoyed great food, enjoying each other's company and the fact that February was finally ending. Linda was the most attractive woman in the room, and I probably told her so a half-dozen times. I looked for any reason to touch her, and she responded in kind, smiling into my eyes. It was a night to remember. We checked into our rooms before heading to the club. She apologized, saying that she needed to come into our room alone for a few minutes. I took advantage of this pause to make sure that the 4 Viagra tablets that I had put in my suit pocket at home were still there. Linda returned with a fake smile on her face, as if she was going to seduce me. "We won't be staying at the club long, will we?" she whispered to me. I knew how much Linda loved to dance with our friends, so it was like, I hope I don't have to wait too long until we're alone. I smiled back at her. We reserved a table for 10 people at the club, which was great. It seemed like a lot of other people were busy forgetting about February, but they weren't too busy to miss the 5 women in our group. "You attract a lot of attention, honey," I whispered to Linda. "You are the most attractive woman in the room, as always," I whispered to Linda. "Oh, you," she looked at me, lightly pressing her soft breasts against my hand. "You don't have to say those things, although I like to hear them." "But I have to," I replied. "The truth is the truth, no matter how you look at it. There is no need to talk about opinions about the truth." She glowed even brighter. I danced with the love of my life, taking occasional breaks for hot wings and drinks. Returning from another run for drinks, I heard Linda say, "I would love to, Dave, and another time for sure, but today I want to make this evening special for Jim and me. I will only dance with him." You have no idea how inflated my ego was at that moment. A few minutes later, the group took a break. In the relative silence, we heard loud laughter from another table and turned around. "Hey, isn't that Mark Lavalier?" Phil craned his neck to look. It's him," Dee shouted shrilly. Mark Lavalier was the star tight end on our city football team. He was known as a really nice guy and was also highly respected for his social work. "And it doesn't hurt that he's handsome," Dee added. Linda and I knew who he was, but at that moment we were not interested in anything except each other. The music started playing again. "Shall we dance here or upstairs?" I whispered to Linda. But before she could respond, Jane interrupted. "Look, he's coming here." Indeed, Mark Lavalier left his table and headed towards ours. I found it funny to watch the reactions of the women at our table. The 4 of them began to preen themselves and act as if they were saying, "Pick me, pick me." Linda looked down and squeezed my hand a little tighter. "Hi, I'm Mark. Do you want to dance?" He stood behind Linda's left shoulder, holding out his hand to her. Linda let go of my hand like unwanted trash. I watched, stunned, as she turned her back to me, offered Mark her right hand, and rose gracefully from her chair. My friends quickly realized that I didn't find it funny. For the first part of the first song, I sat there with a stupid, "what the hell" expression on my face. But that quickly turned into a very angry expression as I crossed my arms and leaned back in my chair. The band played a couple of fast songs and the whole club watched them dance. Linda was clearly enjoying herself. Her partner and her dress together enhanced her beauty. "They look great together. Come on, Jim, let's join them," Dee suggested, clearly trying to distract me. I didn't answer. It was supposed to be our special night, and some famous bastard just stepped in and ruined everything. The next song was slow. I watched as Linda melted in his arms, fitting him perfectly as if she belonged there. Another slow song followed, this time a ballad. Mark smiled as he held Linda in his arms. He was clearly pleased with what was happening. Only he was happy. I was trying to figure out how angry was too much. Finally, the song ended. Mark nodded to the group leader, who began to play faster. He and Linda left the dance floor, smiling at each other, but not touching, not even holding hands. Linda gave him one last dazzling smile as she turned to our table, and Mark headed back to his. When Linda approached our table and our eyes met, her best smile faded to second best. But that too disappeared when she realized that I was not smiling. She looked away from me and looked across the table at Dee. "Sorry, guys, I just have to go to the ladies' room now. Linda, will you come with me?" Dee's voice could be heard far beyond our table. I was too angry to think about why she had to say it so loudly. Linda apologized to me. "Sorry, Jim. I could use some freshening up too," she said and left. The table was completely silent for several minutes until I saw Dee returning. I was nodding to myself long before she sat down. "Will she come back to the table?" I asked. "Jim, Linda loves you. She loves you and the kids more than anything in the world, and you know it. But tonight she will spend the night with Mark." The freezing cold that spread through my body gave me almost claustrophobic tunnel vision, and the tightness in my chest seemed to want to squeeze all the air out of me. But apparently this did not affect my face, since no one seemed concerned about my health. If anything, they seemed more afraid for their safety, as all my friends looked like they were ready to move further away from me. "Look, Jim, I know it hurts, but it's just for today. Linda knows, as we all do, that you are the only man for her, and that will always be the case. You're a good guy." This idiot clearly didn't understand the whole situation, but I just silently glared at her. "You're making too much of a problem out of this. It's just one night, and then she'll come back to you tomorrow, and everything will be the same. She asked me to remind you that she loves you and will always come home to you. Are you completely abnormal?" Dee leaned back in her chair as far as she could, her eyes wide and frightened. I took a long breath to calm myself and let it out slowly. Dee was an idiot, but she wasn't the one who just ripped my heart out. Several of my friends and their wives laughed, but I noticed some movement near the bar. When I looked over there, I saw that the young woman had just spat out her tequila sunrise on the floor laughing. She closed her eyes and shook her head in self-condemnation. I watched as she grabbed some napkins from the bar and began wiping her face and clothes. I smiled as I watched her, until she met my gaze and said silently, "You son of a bitch." She laughed. I laughed too. I didn't think I could do this for at least the next 10 years. I shook my head with a smile. "You know what? I have somewhere to go," I said, pulling my wallet out of my pocket and placing $200 on the table. I then stood up and took off my wedding ring, throwing it on the table. "You're not going to divorce Linda over this, are you?" Dave asked. I laughed again. "Good night, guys," I said, heading towards the bar. She was a real top 10, not that bitch Linda. Girl at the bar. Blonde, blue eyes, long legs, C-cup breasts, and all this is wrapped in a tight sky blue dress. Double Johnny Walker Black, no ice. And Coca-Cola in addition, without ice. "Please," I told the bartender, handing her my credit card. "Is it that simple?" the girl asked. Apparently, I smiled. She nodded several times. She nodded several times. I saw it all, you know. I nodded too. When I wasn't looking at Mark, I was watching this sweet couple dancing and drinking, so lost in each other. I thought she would turn him down. "Yeah, me too," I sighed, taking my 2 glasses from the bartender and taking a long sip of whiskey. She took a sip of her drink before saying, "So your girlfriend is leaving you for Mark Lavalier, and 10 minutes later you just get back into the game." No," I replied. Her eyes widened in surprise. "My wife of 10 years. "Whoa, damn," she interrupted. "And the mother of my 2 children," I smiled. "Damn," she narrowed her eyes at me. I don't want to seem like a bitch. Oh, please be a bitch. It's trendy now, I laughed. Okay, smart guy. Are you sure you loved her? I mean, 10 minutes. I nodded. Yes, yes, I loved her madly. So much so that I didn't even notice you in the room until that moment. And if my eyes weren't focused only on her, I would definitely notice you. She seemed flattered as she took another sip of her drink. So how can you come to your senses so quickly? I shrugged as I finished my whiskey. She stole the last 10 years from me. I refused to give her this night too. You know, I'm not an easy target, right? Honey, if all I get out of tonight is a nice conversation with the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, she shrugged coquettishly, then I'll consider this a victory, I said. How do you not get hysterical? I just push everything deep inside and think about something more important. More important than your marriage? 10 minutes ago? No. But now? Oh, hell yeah, I smiled at her, sipping a cola. She laughed again. Still, pushing it deep inside doesn't sound healthy. I shrugged slightly. This is not healthy, but I'm only doing this for today. She nodded. Tomorrow I will return to our house, go into my daughter's room and cry, curled up in the fetal position. She looked like she felt guilty when she laughed. I'll just ugly cry, you know. She nodded at me with a smile. I understand, actually. I felt someone pull my hand. I turned around and saw that it was Dave. Jim, what are you doing? He asked. I frowned. I'm trying to get this amazing woman to sleep with me, I said, pointing at the girl without looking at her. But what about Linda? Dave, I exclaimed with irritation, rubbing my eyes with my right hand. If this wonderful woman doesn't come with me to the hotel tonight? I nodded. Because of your interference. I cracked my neck to the left. Tomorrow I will come to your house and kick your ass. So you better start praying that she finds me the most horny motherfucker on the entire planet. Do you understand? He nodded in response. Great. Now get out, Captain Blocker, I said, turning back to the girl, who laughed again. I shook my head with a smile. Ruthlessly honest, huh? Depending on the situation, yes, I nodded again, sipping my Coke. So your name is Jim. That's right, I smiled again. She took another sip of her tequila sunrise. Aren't you going to ask my name? Do you just not care? This is very important, but... I hesitated, not knowing how to continue. But she smiled with a slight shake of her head. No mercy from this woman. I ordered more whiskey. Then he cleared his throat. You're incredibly out of my league. Thank you, she replied modestly. I laughed. So I need to be very careful how I handle you. She narrowed her eyes in thought. What does that have to do with my name? I shrugged. If asked at the wrong time, it can seem needy or intrusive. And since you were here throughout my nightmare, the last thing I need is for you to think that I might be intrusive. I finished, taking my drink from the bartender. She thought about it for a moment before nodding. By the way, my name is Ellen. I swallowed a sip of whiskey. Oh God, I hate this name. Sorry, I have to leave, I said, pretending to leave. I cannot describe how glad I was when she, laughing, grabbed my hand to stop my feigned flight. No, seriously. It's a great name, it suits you. I'm not sure I like it, she said, shaking her head. Well, I think your parents chose well. Besides, with your appearance, L would be too obvious. Oh my God, you're good at this, she laughed. I smiled even wider. This woman was a real salvation. What did you imagine your evening like when you went out? I asked. Have a couple of cocktails. You can check the box, I interrupted. She smiled with a slight nod. Fend off several unpleasant types with unsuccessful tackles. I guess the box can be ticked. She nodded. And maybe dance a little. I finished my drink. Ellen, would you like to dance? I asked, holding out my hand to her. Her eyebrows rose in a flirtatious gesture before she took my hand. I took her to the dance floor and lost track of time. I don't know how many songs we danced to. but the last three were slow. Ellen pressed herself against me in a comfortable but insistent manner. The band announced that they were taking a break. Ellen and I couldn't agree more. I took a couple of Viagra tablets out of my pocket and ordered 2 bottles of water for us. Pretending to scratch my face when our drinks arrived, I popped the pills into my mouth before handing the bottle of water to Ellen. I took the pills and asked, "Are you ready to leave here? If she says no, you can always go back to the hotel and have fun with pornography. It'll still take my mind off Linda." She thought for a moment. "I told you I'm not an easy target, Jim. And I never said you were, but..." She raised her left eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "I have a room at the Four Seasons." I slid my hands around her waist and pulled her closer. "With a bottle of Crystal on ice and a dozen chocolate-covered strawberries just waiting for me to command them to come." Well." She wrapped her arms around my neck. "I think I should at least try the champagne," she smiled. I smiled and nodded several times, slowly moving closer to her until I was almost touching her with my nose. I waited a moment for her to make a decision, and then she tilted her head slightly to the left, and I kissed her tenderly several times. "You taste delicious," I whispered. This brought out another quiet laugh from her. I carefully led her across the dance floor to the cloakroom at the entrance to the club. I looked to my right and saw that all my friends were still sitting at our table. But before I could wave at them, Phil, of all people, stood up and shouted, "Jim is my damn hero." And then everyone except Dee and Jane applauded. And I mean everything. The patrons, the staff, even the band members who were still on stage. Ellen blushed to the roots of her hair and covered her face with her hands. But I heard her laugh. I waved to the guys and a few other people around as Ellen, and I approached the exit. "You know we'll never go back to that bar again," she said with a laugh as I helped her with her coat. "Are you crazy? This is our new home." I smiled. "These people adore us," I said, putting on my coat. Ellen looked at the girl at the counter, who just shrugged and nodded. Ellen was embarrassed by some ridiculous feeling of shame, but still laughed. I held the door for her and hugged her as we walked towards the hotel. "Thank you for making this evening so wonderful," I told her. "Haha, I didn't do anything." "Oh, don't say that. You could very well just send me packing at any moment." She tilted her neck to look at me. "Are you serious?" A guy who, it would seem, should be in despair comes up to me and turns out to be more intriguing, charming, and confident than 90% of those who rushed at me today. And you think I could say no? She looked ahead and took a deep breath. "Your wife is an idiot, Jim." Future ex-wife. "Sorry, your soon-to-be ex-wife is an idiot, Jim." That's better. We held each other not only to keep warm. I was a little disappointed when I had to let go of her to open the door, but the warmth of the hotel was nice. "You know, with all this fuss, I never asked what you like to do in your free time," I asked as we walked through the lobby. "I like to read," she shrugged. "About? What's your favorite genre?" I pressed the elevator call button. "Literary prose." "Jesus," I muttered under my breath. She glared at me as we entered the elevator, and I pressed the button for the desired floor. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" Genres are more like settings, like science fiction, westerns, contemporary literature, and so on." She narrowed her eyes at me before saying, "Romance." It was like it was a test. Good point. I think it would be more accurate to say that literary prose is simply sad. But you can't have a genre that expresses only feelings, because my favorite genre is happiness. I smiled at her. Her squint turned into a real evil look. "I hate you." I laughed when the doors opened. Then he leaned down and kissed her passionately. "Thanks for that," I said. She gave me a small smile. "At any time." Then her eyes widened as she pointed behind me. "Door." I managed to insert my hand between the doors in time so that we could leave, laughing, and went to my room. When I entered, I helped Ellen take off her coat and hung it in the small closet. I was just about to hang mine up when I heard, "Oh, well, that's interesting." I walked up to the bed and saw a god of a chocolate bar on each pillow. In the middle of the bed was a bra and panty set that I had never seen before. They were dark blue, darker than Linda's dress, with black lace trim. I muttered, slipping a finger into my panties. Then he collected the chocolates and looked at it all, shaking his head. Sorry, Jim. What? I raised my head sharply to look at Ellen. She looked at me sadly. No, 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 no. I just thought that she didn't know me at all. What do you mean? I don't like God of a chocolate. Well, it's not that I don't like them, but they seem bland to me. And the underwear. I lifted my panties. It should be smooth, so that you can run your hand over it without clinging to a bunch of embroidery. I told her about this before, but chocolates are her favorite. And probably underwear too, Ellen added. I nodded. More likely, most of her underwear looks like this. I sighed. Slowly, a huge smile appeared on my face. What? Ellen asked nervously. Do you mind wearing this and letting me take a photo? I asked. No, she shook her head. Only for phone screensaver. No, she laughed. So I can use it as a trophy. No, that sounds like a terrible idea. I guess so, I laughed along with her. Would you like a god of a chocolate bar? Yes, please. I gave her the candy and threw the panties in the trash and ordered champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries. We talked for a while until the food arrived. I carefully poured the champagne, covering the bottle with a towel to catch the cork, holding the bottle over the ice bucket. We sat and drank almost a glass. We'd both already had a little to drink that evening, so I didn't see the point in pouring more. I tried one of the chocolate-covered strawberries. It was good, but I was already pretty full. Ellen ate too, then stood up and looked out the window. She was the epitome of beauty, standing with her back to me in that dress, with the city lights behind her. So relaxed, so confident, I almost couldn't take my eyes off her. But I had work to do. The challenge, I needed to regain my self-respect. I put the glass on the bedside table and got up from the chair. He took the tie off his neck. He unbuttoned his jacket and vest, leaving them in the chair. Then he approached Ellen from behind. I placed my hands on her hips, gently pressing myself against her. Suddenly, she began to tremble. I whispered in her ear, "It's okay." I kissed her jaw. "I won't ruin this moment." I slowly ran my thumbs along her back, where my hands rested. Her eyes were tightly closed. "Do you trust me?" I kissed her on the neck. I barely heard her quiet. "Yes." "I won't hurt you." I kissed her behind the ear. "I know," she almost moaned. "Why are you so nervous?" I whispered. "I'm the one who needs to impress you." She bit her lip and shook her head slightly. "I want this to be the best you ever had." Her voice almost broke into tears. I shook my head with a smile. "Ellen, this is already the best." We made love tenderly. My alarm clock rang. For what? I thought. Kill him. Burn him with fire, I heard Ellen mutter faintly. She was all over my chest. Drool. God, she's so cute in the morning. I almost laughed. Hell, the alarm was set to remind us that we had an hour left before checkout. So it's already 10 in the morning. I started kissing her forehead and around it. "Hey, baby, we have an hour before we leave." She muttered contentedly. Then she sighed. "Damn. Do we need to get up?" she asked without opening her eyes. "Yes." I smiled and kissed her nose. She opened her eyes and answered me with several kisses. Fuck morning breath. We finally got out of bed, showered, and got dressed. I packed what little I had brought and suddenly realized that Linda's things were still there. It took me a little while to figure out what to do. I put her sneakers, socks, jeans, blouse, and toiletries in the 3 trash cans that were in the room. Then he sighed with satisfaction. "Feel better?" Ellen asked with a smile. "A lot," I smiled in response. "Coffee?" I asked as we approached the elevator. We grabbed coffee in the lobby and checked out of the hotel before I asked her, "Will I see you again?" She sighed and shook her head. "Jim, you're too much. Understand?" I nodded. Yes, I'm going through a lot right now. No, she interrupted, shaking her head. I mean, yeah, you have a lot going on. But you are too. Everyone in the bar applauded you. I laughed. This is not normal. Believe me, I know. When did my husband leave me? I just fell apart. And you? She shook her head. It's clear. I nodded with another smile. But, and sex, she interrupted. Several people stopped and looked at us. It was. I laughed and patted her on the shoulder. Listen, I understand that you might not be able to handle this. Okay? She nodded in response. But do you have the strength to try before it really becomes too much? She shook her head. Don't know. Okay, I nodded with another smile. You are so much more than I could ever hope for, and I don't want to miss you just because it's not a good time, okay? Yes, she answered with doubt in her voice. So I need time to recover. How about I make a reservation for us at Madison for 8 p.m. this Friday? This will give you time to think about everything, and for me to recover a little from all this, I hope. Can you meet me at Madison this Friday at 8, even if the answer is no? She licked her lips, considering my proposal for a minute. Yes, she sighed. I can do this. She nodded. I smiled again. This is more than I could have hoped for. Thank you. Then I kissed her. She looked at me for a moment, waved goodbye, and turned to leave. I headed to Linda's and my Camry in the hotel parking lot. Forward and only forward. I parked next to our minivan and turned off the engine. I left my bag in the car. There was no point in bringing it if I was going to load it again. I went into the house and took off my suit, hanging it up. It was more of a tuxedo than a business suit, and since I've decided to spend the next few days in the office, I won't need it. I packed a suitcase with enough casual clothes for the week and took a few of my suits out of the closet and took them to the car along with the suitcase. There is a time for laughter, and there is a time for tears. And when something you love dies, you need to mourn it. Otherwise, you will never be able to move on. I went to what was now Linda's bedroom, sat on our bed, and pulled out my phone. I started looking through all the photos I had collected over the years of our marriage. I started crying already in the pictures from our engagement party, but I finally broke through before Emma's second birthday. That's when I fell on my side, clutching the pillow to me like a life preserver, and sobbed until my throat hurt. Finally, I cried. I got up, washed my face, and dried my eyes. He looked at his reflection in the mirror and said, "You're one tough motherfucker." I kept looking until I was sure I believed it. Then I left, locked the house, and went to the office. The office was equipped with a shower, televisions, a refrigerator, and a sofa for me to sleep on. I've had even less. I stopped to grab a few snacks and other things for my stay. Then I put everything in its place when I got there. I cried several times again. There was simply no other way. I was watching an old anime called Vampire Hunter D when my phone vibrated. I looked at the phone screen and saw, "Bitch." What's happened? "Hello, where are you?" Linda asked. I even pulled the phone away to look at it, hoping that somehow the phone would make sense of her last question. "You have find device, idiot. What does 'where am I' mean?" I heard her clear her throat. "When are you coming home?" "You were my home, until she destroyed it last night." Do you want to rephrase the question? "No, Jim, you still have a home." "Bitch, you burned it." The children ask when you will be home." "Crap. I forgot about those little buggers. I didn't forget them at the nanny's." Fuck Linda, she could have taken them. I mean, in my misery, I forgot how to do it without ruining their lives too much. Tell them something happened and I'm at work. But I'll be there in 30 minutes. Then I hung up and took the keys. Emma and Tommy rushed across the living room to me as soon as I crossed the threshold. I got down on one knee and scooped up one of my children with each arm as they squealed, "Daddy," in my ears. None of them were silent for a minute. You would have thought they had been gone for a week, judging by the amount of important information they had to tell me. And of course, they had to correct each other on almost every point, because their brother or sister could not be right. It was loud, it was chaotic, and I couldn't get a word in even if I wanted to. This was exactly what I needed. Eventually, they calmed down and went back to playing, leaving me alone with Linda. I stared at her, waiting to see what crap she would come up with to fix everything. "It's still me, the same as always," she said with a gentle smile. Of course, she knew what I was thinking. "Nothing has changed. My love for you is the same as yesterday." I laughed and nodded. "Yes, that's the problem." I smiled. I think she realized that things weren't going according to plan. "Jim, I want to make this evening special for you. To thank you for allowing me to do this amazing thing." I sighed. "I didn't allow you anything. You did it yourself. And if by special you mean sex." "Well, yes," she said, rubbing the back of her head with her right hand. I nodded. "I don't have second-class sex with anyone." She lowered her hand, and her expression changed to anger. "And the incubation period of HIV is 6 months. I do not have AIDS. Well, yes, a minute ago you thought that I would have sex with you again. So excuse me if I don't take your word for it." I laughed. Now she was sulking. I shook my head. "You never knew me right. I know that our love will withstand any test and will last a lifetime. I know you're in a lot of pain. I know that I have to atone for this, and I will do it, no matter what the cost. But most of all, I know that you love me so much that eventually you will overcome your pain and everything will be fine between us." "God, you're delirious." She looked stunned, but was about to say something. I raised my hand to stop her. "We have no love. You proved it last night." "No, Jim, never think like that. You mean the whole world to me." I raised my hand again. "That's enough," I said in a condescending tone. "You can't get out of this. You can't pretend you love me just because you can say it." I shook my head. "Last night did you show me how I feel, children's welfare, our marriage? None of this matters if it comes between you and what you want. Jim, I didn't mean to hurt you. No, it's much worse. You didn't care if it hurt me or not. You wanted to be the center of attention, and you didn't care at what cost." She started crying again. "This is not true. Your actions say otherwise." After a long silence, she asked, "Who was that girl?" I pretended to take a shocked breath. "Which girl?" "The one you left with." She frowned. Ellen." I smiled as if I had pleasant memories of her, because I did. "Oh God, I hope she's at Madison on Friday. Did you sleep with her?" "Babe." I shook my head at her and sighed. "Because of you? I had the best night of my life." I didn't laugh or smile. I was just being honest. She started crying again. She'll get used to it. I'm used to it." What now?" she asked quietly between sobs. "I need to call LV and find out what awaits us." "No," she whispered. Suddenly, she burst into uncontrollable crying. She tried to rush towards me, but I pushed her away. She was shaking all over. I had never seen her so broken and could not even imagine that she could be like this. "I never wanted this. Never, never this. I wasn't looking for this, never. Neither him nor anyone else. You know that this is not so. You have seen everything. I would never do this. I I love you so much, Jim, and I want you. Only you. Please believe me. Please tell me I didn't ruin everything. I'll die if I destroy it. You're strong, Jim. Please tell me we can fix this. Please give me some hope. Please, for God's sake, tell me you love me." "I hope you die, you selfish bitch." She was so shocked that she stopped crying. I shook my head at her again. "What did you expect? Did you really think you wouldn't have to pay for this?" Now she was shaking her head, as if confused. "Because of this? This was an isolated mistake." "No, the mistake sounds like it was an accident. It's like you didn't want it." She was still shaking her head. "But you wanted it. It was just a bump in the road. We can survive this." I nodded. "Yeah, to you, it's just a little bump in the road, because you don't care that my heart was ripped out." "Jim, She tried to approach me again. I pushed her away again. She cried even harder. "I never wanted to hurt you. Your actions say otherwise." We had dinner and read with the kids, as always. Then it was time to go to bed. I kissed them when we put them to bed. No matter what Linda does, no matter what happens to us, I will do everything possible for my children, whatever it cost me. We returned to the kitchen, probably out of habit. Put the kids to bed, put away the leftovers from dinner, talk a little before bed. Linda reached out to touch my neck, as she always did when I was stressed. I waved her off. "Stop it," I said sharply, as if she were an annoying pest. She sighed. When it became obvious that she didn't know what to say, I said, "You need to get tested for styes this week." "Do you have to embarrass me like that, Jim? Mark is an athlete. He must be clean, I'm sure of it." "It's not for me, dumbass," I replied sarcastically. "Fuck you. I'm not stupid, asshole." "I'm not an asshole," I smiled. "I'm an asshole. The goat doesn't realize he's being offensive. Anyway, you slept with a professional football player. These guys live in Puntown. You probably weren't the first woman he slept with that day." She shook her head, thinking. "Do you want to know the results? I really don't care. But your weak grasp of reality has already destroyed your marriage. Don't let it destroy your body, too." I was waiting for her answer because it seemed like she was having a hard time choosing what to say. Finally, she looked at me and nodded several times. "I'm going back to the office to sleep. I'll stop by for dinner tomorrow to see the kids." "When are you going to?" She bit her tongue. "Well done." I smiled a cruel but proud smile. "When will you return to the house for good?" I thought about it. "It depends on what LV says." She nodded. I left. I went back to the office to sleep. And yes, I cried again. I made sure I was home before the kids woke up and made them breakfast. I spent the day with my children, enduring Linda's presence and sometimes going to the garage to cry when necessary. Sunday also showed me that I owe a lot to Mark. Not only because he inspired me to meet Ellen, but because he brought to light what was wrong in my marriage. I wasted 10 years on a woman who just used me until something better came along. As I watched my children play, I prayed, "Thank you, Mark, for not letting this go on for 15 or 20 years." On Monday after work, I met with LV. He has been a family friend since my grandfather's time. He had mostly retired, but was still razor sharp, wise as sophocles, and tough as steel when it came to our family's needs. I told him the whole sad story. He sat and thought for a while. We talked a little about women who cheated on celebrities and how they never regretted it. How shocking it was, I didn't care. Then the old man became serious. "You want to know what options you have for divorce. They are not good for either of you. I take it you're both still working where you worked, making about the same money." I nodded. "Then, most likely, you won't have to pay much child support, but you will be required to pay child support. She'll get primary custody, so she'll get the house, but you'll still pay about half the mortgage. What do you have saved?" "We saved every penny to buy a bigger house, so there's some money there." My sadness deepened as I thought about the home we had longed for, where we planned to raise our children and grow old together. This money will be divided equally. As you can see, the result is that both of you will experience financial difficulties for quite a long time, unless one of you gets married for money or wins the lottery. LV sighed. "As your lawyer, I will draw up documents if you ask me to. As your family friend, I will not serve them for at least 90 days. This is a standard cooling-off period, and you need it." "I don't need him." "You need it." I sighed. "LV, I have no choice." He looked puzzled. "Look, this was not a situation that can be forgiven. You see, I could understand if we were having difficulties in our relationship. What if she begged me for attention, for affection, and I ignored her? Of course, then the blame would be on both of us, and I would be ready to endure it. What if she was so drunk that she didn't know what she was doing? Maybe." I shrugged, "depending on the situation in this case. But this? No." I shook my head. It was intentional, and at a time when we were at our best. LV, I just collapsed, more emotionally than physically. I continued. "And the reason I must get a divorce is because what kind of example does this set for Emma and Tommy? Emma can do whatever she wants, and her husband will still put up with it. And life sucks for Tommy, baby. Sometimes you need to give in to your woman so that the family stays together. One last thing. I need a divorce so that Linda understands that there are consequences for her actions. Maybe she'll be smarter next time. He was silent for a long time. You need to understand that there is something in your life for which you are ready to do anything to preserve or protect. I know it used to be Linda. Now you need to find something, or better yet, someone to live for. Find it and let it guide your actions. It's simple. Children. Oh, damn. I remembered something. He looked hopeful. Not so much when I told him what I wanted to do. However, he was optimistic in the end. No, this was not a grand revenge plan to ruin Linda and Mark's lives. Just something that was supposed to provide children with a good childhood. LV was so desperate for us to survive that he still insisted on a 6-month pause. After all, it wouldn't make much of a difference to my life, so I agreed. He was almost like family, so of course, why not? I came home that evening, smelled a delicious dinner, and saw my future ex-wife in that same blue dress, with a smile that tried to be the best, but was betrayed by her insecurities. She started backing away as I walked towards her. She stopped when she hit the kitchen counter. I hooked my fingers under the top of that shit's high collar and tore it open. Linda let out a small cry. I grabbed the broken ends and tore the damned thing in two, tearing it off her body. Linda stood shivering in her underwear. I crumpled up the remains of the dress and handed them to her. It's this kind of stupidity that makes forgiveness impossible. I didn't mean. I wanted. I sighed and walked over to the pantry and grabbed lighter fluid and a lighter. Go get dressed before the kids see you, I said, walking towards the fireplace. I threw the dress into the fireplace and carefully doused it with lighter fluid. Then I set it on fire and watched it burn. When I turned around, Linda was still standing there, just watching. Go get dressed. I don't know how I survived that evening, pretending to enjoy it all, but I managed. I can't say that I deserved any kind of Oscar. I didn't fool Linda, but the kids didn't notice anything strange, and that was all I cared about. We stood in silence for some time. I put the coffee on the boil. I talked to LV today. What did he say? That we are too poor for a divorce, I said, looking at her. She looked wary, as if she knew it was a trap. I told him to go ahead with it. Her shoulders sagged. And how? She didn't finish. I want to do what is best for the children. I saw her nod. And one day I heard about a couple who got divorced, I don't know why. But they earned good money. One was a doctor, the other a lawyer. I made sure she was watching me. Each of them bought an apartment for themselves, but left the house so as not to disturb the lives of their children. She looked puzzled. She knew we couldn't afford it. They changed every 2 weeks, taking turns living with the children in the house, and when they were not with the children, they lived in their own apartments. Are you really going to throw away our 10 years together over this? I don't throw anything away. I shook my head. You did it. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? It was Mark Lavalier. Can't you really just give me that night? I sighed. I don't make a big deal out of it. This is a big problem, you stupid chicken. She didn't like my insult. I'm sorry that you don't understand that cheating leads to divorce. But I spread my arms to emphasize the world around us. Almost everyone else understands. Judging by her expression, she didn't like any of this. So, what are we going to do? I'll finish renovating the garage for another bedroom. You stay in the master's room, and we will be housemates. She looked even more depressed. As soon as the children grow up and leave, then we can sell the house. If I find a serious relationship, I will bring her a few times to introduce her to the kids before she becomes a regular dinner guest, and you will do the same. I think at this point she really realized how badly she screwed up. From the moment he asked me to dance, I stopped and looked at her. She stood with her back against the kitchen table, arms crossed, staring at the floor. She shook her head. I was no longer in control of the situation. Everything just happened. I didn't know what I was doing. She finished, looking at me. This is complete nonsense. You didn't talk to me. You didn't ask if you could dance with him. You didn't ask if you could sleep with him. You didn't ask why I was upset when you sat down at the table. You did everything to prevent me from interfering, and you had enough control to tell Dee this long story about how you were going to sleep with Mark, but love me. So no, you were in control, Linda. You were a selfish bitch, and you wanted Mark. Now you're a selfish bitch who doesn't want to be a bad person. I guess I don't want to think of myself as a woman who could do something like that. Yeah, well, let me know when you get to the stage where it's my fault you slept with him. Her gaze went back to the floor, but now she looked sharply at me. I'm looking forward to this moment. Jim, I love you. I was about to answer, but she raised her hand and closed her eyes. I know. I know. She looked at me. But there must be a moment in the future when you can trust me again, right? I sighed heavily. Do you understand that I had to open my own savings and checking accounts today? She looked scared. Because I can't trust you to be there for the kids in the long run. She simply shook her head several times. But can I ever trust you again? Hope. In the end, I hope we can be friends again. For the sake of the children, if not for the sake of something more. Her eyes brightened a little at this small hope. Is it true? Take it easy, tigress. You have a long way to go before we get there. We drank coffee and talked about things that didn't matter. How much heavy stuff can you bear in a day? Even I had my limits. I need to get back to the office, I said when I noticed it was late. Can't you stay here? I looked at her like she was crazy. Please? I sighed. I have a date with Ellen on Friday. Oh God. She exhaled, leaning on the table for support. I waited for her to come to her senses. Still want me to stay the night? I asked without humor in my voice. She straightened up and looked into my eyes. Yes, always. Let's see. Good night, Linda. She nodded and walked me to the door. I put on my tan suit with a blue shirt and my thick black wool coat. Our date was scheduled for 8 p.m. I was in Madison by 7:15. I was a little nervous. I waited until 8:15 before I took my seat. I ordered appetizers, mainly because the disappointment had left me with no appetite. Is this seat taken? That voice. My head shot up and my smile immediately faded. Standing in front of me was a blonde woman wearing thick horn-rimmed glasses and a black nylon suit with padded shoulders. The suit was 2 sizes too big, and she was wearing one of those peach blouses from the 80s with a huge bow on the chest. It reminded me of those Adam Ant-style lace shirts. And the skirt? It was straight and reached just below the knees, but the belt stuck out so that she seemed. With protruding hips? Ellen? I squealed. Aren't you glad to see me? She smiled, putting her hand on my shoulder. Are you at a role-playing game based on the new D&D system? God, you're a nerd. She laughed. These are my work clothes. I wanted to see how you would react. I shook my head. Where do you work? Some retro 80s office supply store. She smiled and sighed. I'm a professor of American literature at a local state college. I nodded, suddenly understanding everything. So, modest and strict. Well, yes, and what if I dress as usual? I have a bunch of horny teenagers staring at my chest instead of listening to what I have to say. She smiled, taking off her glasses and putting them in her purse. Are you by car? Yes, I paid for parking a couple of blocks from here. Great. She nodded, taking off her jacket. Then she unzipped her skirt and let it fall to the floor, revealing a tight black miniskirt that reached mid-thigh. She then took off her blouse, revealing a tight white turtleneck sweater. Better? She smiled. I had to pull myself together to get out of the chair and help her sit down. Okay, tell me how it went, she asked. Pretty bad. I shrugged, perplexed. Yeah, details, and how do you cope? She asked as the waiter took our order. Aren't these the very things I should not talk about on our first date? This is not our first date, this is already our second. And we started from an unusual point, so tell us. And I told her everything that happened that week. About her tears, Linda's, and LV's confusion. I don't think he agrees with me that divorce is necessary, but... I shrugged again. Well, yes, because if you just continue and your love wins everything, she'll just do it again, right? and I think the celebrity requirement will become much lower. I nodded. But dear, he is the same city councilman. She laughed. But he's a weather presenter from Channel 8. I smiled. But he has advertisements for used cars. We laughed. God, why does this suddenly make me feel bad? She raised an eyebrow. Probably because you're right. I told her about my plan. She grimaced when I explained about Linda and I being housemates. So, now let's move on to the second part of our dinner. Have you decided where you stand in all of this? I asked. She sighed and put down her fork. Jim, You need more, I interrupted her. What? She frowned. And get it together, weirdo. She shook her head, laughing. Then she sighed. I don't want to be a mother. I nodded. And at the risk of appearing, she shook her head several times. No matter how you feel about women who don't want to be mothers, I don't want to be one of them. I frowned. So you don't want to be around my children? No, I just don't want to have children. I have nephews and nieces. I love children. I love being around them, and I have no problem living in the same house as them while they are growing up. I just don't want to carry these little parasites inside me, destroying your body just to help continue the race. You are a monster. Shut up, she laughed. This is not a barrier for me. I already have 2 wonderful children. That's enough for me. Okay. She took a deep breath, took a glass of wine, and looked into my eyes. And my career comes first. I shook my head slightly. That is, at the moment I am a professor of literature and am looking for a position as dean of literature at a more prestigious school. How is you? Why the hell should I want to go to the University of Oklahoma? Point 1. You are in Oklahoma, she laughed. No, I don't have anything yet. I'm just looking around, preferably Ivy League. So, what you're really saying is that all of this, I pointed at us, it's a matter of time. She sighed. Yes, but it could be years, decades, perhaps never. I nodded. And that suits me. Is it true? Yes, I nodded. Look, I can't predict the future. I can only cope with the present. Aren't you worried about me coming into your children's lives only to leave at any moment? I laughed. It's called life. So no, I'm fine with that. Right now, you are the best thing that happened to me. So I'll hold on to you as long as I can. Is this an acceptable answer? She smiled, sliding her hand across the table to squeeze mine. Yes, that's true. We finished dinner and put her things in my car before heading to Morrison's. Jim? I looked up and saw a bouncer standing at the entrance. Yes? I asked when we approached him. No, baby, you don't have to wait in line, he said, letting us inside. Ellen and I looked at each other, not understanding. Then they apologized to the people who were still standing in line. We handed over our coats and went to the club, thinking it was weird but cool at the same time, until I realized that the girl from the wardrobe was still walking with us. Jim, Ellen, right here, please, she said, leading us to the seats at the bar we had occupied last week. Do you want Hero? Asked the bartender. What? I asked in surprise. What the hell is going on? Double Johnny Walker Black with Coke without ice. You gave him a name? Ellen laughed out loud. Yes, she laughed and began to pour. Ellen, would you like a tequila sunrise? Ellen was shocked that the girl remembered her drink, but nodded. Sorry, we couldn't change the name to Ellen. The boss said that tequila sunrise is a very famous cocktail. We had just sat down as the band finished their last song. The vocalist shouted, Jim is in the building, and here's where everything became surreal. The whole club blew up. Jim is my fucking hero, and they applauded. The barmaid handed us our drinks. Is this all because of what happened last Friday? I asked her. It was a boring season, she laughed. We laughed about it. What else could we do? The conversation went quite easily after all this. But just as I was ordering the second round, I heard, Do you want to dance? Before I could fully understand who said it, Ellen shouted. No, get away from me. Mark Lavalier stood there, smiling, without an iota of surprise. What the hell is wrong with you? I asked him, slowly turning my chair to look at him. It was a joke, he said. It was disrespectful, I replied. I'm sorry you felt insulted, he chuckled. Not for me, stupid. I pointed at Ellen. Hey man, you gotta be careful. I can kick your ass. How, Mark? You are trained to play football. I was born, raised, and trained to break people's bones. I shook my head as he took a step back. You know, if I knew you were here, I would have found you myself to say thank you. This surprised him. But then you go out and do this crap. I shook my head again. I really didn't understand what was wrong with him. What would you thank me for? Because you showed me that my marriage was a sham. She was just biding her time until something better came along. Thanks to you, it didn't take even longer. You brought me out of it and inspired me to find this amazing woman. I carefully pointed at Ellen. She responded by bowing respectfully at my compliment. Mark laughed good-naturedly before saying, Come on, I don't even know what to answer. I said, Everyone says you're a good guy, but what you're doing now is turning you into an asshole, and I just can't understand why you're doing this. He looked uncomfortable. What's the matter? Are you looking for a thrill? Because it seems like you're starting a lot of problems for the sake of women who don't matter to you. In his embarrassed expression, a clue finally appeared that gave me an idea. Damn it, so that's it. Some asshole did this to you. Probably when you weren't famous yet. Fuck you. You don't know me. I'm not attacking you, boy. That calmed him down a little. I shook my head again. But you won't protect yourself from pain this way, brother. Someone will always get inside anyway. He shook his head as if I was wrong. No. No. I sighed. Look, man, I don't know if our society instills this in us or if it's really ordained by God, and I don't care. He laughed. But what I know works is to find one woman. I looked at Ellen, and focus on her, giving her all of yourself, and pray that she does the same. Mark sighed. And what happens when it turns out she doesn't? I shrugged. You cry, get up, dust yourself off, and find another woman. I looked at Ellen again, and you start all over again, and you continue to do this until you find the one that remains, or until you die. But you continue to move forward. No matter what happens to you, you need to mourn the loss of her and start again, because this shit you're doing right now is destroying you from the inside. He stood still, contemplating what I said, before finally turning to Ellen. I'm sorry I was disrespectful to you. I heard about Hero when the guys came. Some people told me who you were, and that lame joke was the best I could come up with to introduce myself. He nodded. Sorry. Ellen nodded politely. It's okay, Mr. Lavalier. I'm sure it sounded better in your head. He laughed. No, not really, but I appreciate your attempt to spare me the shame. He shook her hand gently. It was nice meeting you, Ellen. Mutually, Mark, she answered. When he extended his hand to me, I stood up from my chair, shook his hand, and gave this big guy a little hug. Take care of yourself, Mark, and let me know if you need anything. He smiled and nodded. Usually, this is my phrase. He waved and walked back to his table where the rest of his friends were waiting. So there won't be a fight. I turned around and saw one of the visitors who had been listening to our entire conversation. I laughed before saying, No. At the end of the day, Mark is just like the rest of us. But he's trying to improve, Ellen added. I nodded. Shall we dance? I suggested. She nodded, and we finished off our drinks as much as we could before heading out onto the dance floor. What song should we order, Jim? Shouted the leader of the group. Without thinking, I shouted, Mississippi Queen by Mountain. We rocked until the end of the evening, and we rented a hotel cheaper than the Four Seasons. I returned home around 11 a.m. on Saturday to find Linda in the kitchen. She was still in her robe, staring at the cup of coffee like a living dead. I poured myself some coffee and sat down opposite her. So this is how it felt. She looked at me. Last week, when I studied it for a while, she was clearly crying. She looked like she hadn't slept well. Hurting her might have brought me pleasure. For a minute. Yes, I whispered loud enough for her to hear. She nodded. Sorry. My head was spinning with millions of nasty words that I could say to her. Words that would have hurt her even more. I don't know, maybe she caught me at a good moment, and I just couldn't say them. So I just sat and drank coffee. We, couldn't we just skip the rest, back to what it was? She begged. When I began to shake my head, she continued, I slept with another man, you slept with another woman. You felt destroyed. Now here I am. I still shook my head calmly. She let out a nervous laugh. Can't we just call it a draw? It's not about sex. Or rather, it's about sex, but it's about betrayal. The way you almost ran to him, as if he were your salvation, and I was disgusting to you. She closed her eyes and winced at my exact description. The children haven't woken up yet? She cleared her throat before answering. Any minute now. I nodded. I'll change clothes and start preparing breakfast. I finished my coffee and went to the garage. There I had a couple of cheap movable wardrobes and a single bed bought on sale. I changed my clothes and turned around to notice Linda standing in the doorway, watching me. She had seen me naked numerous times, so I continued getting dressed. Was she better than me? Every woman has her own Linda. She was just different. Do you like her other better than mine? I'm not with her because her other is better. I'm with her because when she promises something, I believe her. When I finished getting dressed, she followed me into the kitchen. Dee called. It's St. Patrick's Day on Monday, and our whole gang is going to Brennigan's for drinks and dancing. They hoped that we would come too. On Monday, she shrugged, still looking depressed. They said it would be early evening. I turned to face her. It would be easier if I introduced them and Ellen's children to the party here next Saturday. She almost shrank. I sighed. You'll have to move on, Linda. How? She screamed, and then quickly covered her mouth, looking towards the children's rooms. I came closer and hugged her. She buried her face in my neck and cried. Thank God the children didn't run out while we were already hugging. Is Mommy okay? Tommy asked, approaching us. Yes, baby. We're just arguing, I said, stroking her back. Mommy, why are you crying? Asked a worried Emma. Linda was silent. I can't blame her. How to explain to children the chaos that has become our life? We're just arguing, baby. You know how you and your friends sometimes fight at school? I asked. Yes, she nodded. I shook my head. The same. And just like you and your friends, Mom and I will eventually make peace. Fine. Fine. Emma didn't look happy, but it seemed to calm her down a little. Sorry, Mommy, she said. I felt Linda wrap her arms around my back and clung tightly to me, still hiding her face. After a moment, she let go of me, then turned around, squatted down so that she was eye level with Emma, and wiped the tears from her face. It's okay, honey. I'm fine. Your dad is right. We just disagree on one issue. She hugged them both and then kissed them on the forehead. Everything will be fine. When she released them, I said, Now run. Mom and Dad still have something to talk about. I'll call you when breakfast is ready. They nodded and returned to their rooms. When they left, Linda turned to me again. She looked at me and, dropping from a squat to her knees, said, You could use me. Linda. She slowly ran her hands up my jeans. I'm a girl of easy virtue, right? I sighed irritably. Use me. Tell me this is the only breakfast I'll ever get. By this point, I had already grabbed her by the hair. She gasped. I pulled her head back, forcing her to tilt her neck to the left and look at me. Take me to your garage and chain me there. Humiliate me and use me as you please. Just stop sleeping with Ellen. I can't do this. You know I deserve worse. I just need to be with you, and if it's like your bitch, then so be it. You are still the mother of my children, and as much as I want to hurt you. Do it, she interrupted. Hit me. Make me sleep on the floor. Whatever, just do this to me for the rest of our lives, she cried. I can't. I know what you want. Of course I want to. But I can't be with a woman I can't trust. She closed her eyes and shook her head before allowing me to help her up. I'm not proud of it, but I knew I'd replay the scene with a different ending later in the evening. I went to prepare breakfast. A party next Saturday seemed like a good idea. It was awkward at first, of course. Our children and other guests' children ran around the backyard enjoying the play area we had installed for Emma and Tommy. They shouted, laughed, and did not seem to notice the adults' awkwardness. Ellen called me before she drove up, just like I asked her to. I made sure to warn Linda and take her with me. If she was going to make a scene, it would be better to do it at the front door, so no one would know about it. We stood there for a few moments before there was a knock on the door. "Hi, Ellen," I smiled, leaning down to kiss her. "This is Linda," I said calmly. They both nodded slightly at each other. Then we stood for a few more moments without closing the door. Ellen was the first to break the silence. "Is this the moment when you call me a family destroyer?" Linda laughed quietly, then shook her head. "No," she laughed again. "Thank you for being there for Jim," she finished with a nod. Ellen smiled back, nodding. "Thank you for letting me enter your house." With these words, Linda led her into the kitchen to put what she had brought, and I closed the door. Ellen's introduction went pretty smoothly. Jane and Dee were the only ones who didn't know how to react to Ellen. But when they saw Linda go out of her way to be kind to her, they followed suit. As for the rest, Ellen became almost a cult figure for them. They adored her. Later, when we were barbecuing, or rather, Dave was cooking, which I can do, but I don't love it like he does, I realized that we were out of ice for the cooler. I needed to go into my room to get more from the refrigerator. I was just passing the kitchen when I heard, "I feel terrible." That sounded like Linda. "Then you should have kept your damn legs together." It sounded like Myrna, Scott's wife. She was usually a very quiet and submissive woman. I have never heard her yell at anyone. Judging by the noise, most of the women were in the kitchen. "Sorry. Sorry," she sighed heavily. "This is your life, your business. I shouldn't have said that." "Oh, God," Linda moaned. "I hurt you too, didn't I?" Myrna continued after a moment. "You two were the best among us. You were so in love, so attached to each other. She seemed ready to cry at any minute. All we had to do was imitate you and we'd be fine. But now, what the hell do we do now?" There was silence. "You keep doing what you were doing," Linda replied. "Put Scott first in everything. And what if it turns out he doesn't do the same for you? Talk to him about it. And as long as he puts you first, you will be fine. Never allow yourself selfish thoughts, run away from them. Think about me and know that only one selfish act can destroy everything." Fuck the ice, I went outside. The party went well, everyone seemed to have fun. Ellen stayed the longest, helping with the cleanup along with a few others. Emma pulled me aside to talk earlier. She told me as I walked her to her car. "How did it go?" She laughed. "She's adorable." I nodded. "She noticed that you were touching me a lot." I nodded again, "Like you did with Mom." I exhaled, filled with tension. "I didn't expect this yet. What did you tell her?" She shrugged. "I told her I'm not here to take her mom's place. That I can't take her mom's place. Her mom will always be her mom, but I would like to be her friend." "Did she buy this?" Ellen hit me. "It wasn't a lie, asshole." She laughed. I laughed and nodded. "Is she okay?" Ellen nodded now after a moment of thought. "I told her I care about you and you care about me. And yes, I think she's at least tolerable." "Good," I said before leaning down and kissing her deeply goodbye. "Thank you for coming. I really enjoyed today." "It was my pleasure." She smiled as she got into her car. "And I would come even if I didn't like you." It was confusing. Why? "I love barbecue." She shrugged before walking away. A few days later, after the children had been put to bed, Linda said, "Emma's teacher called me and asked if anything was wrong at home." "Why?" "That's pretty much what I said," she said with a slight smile. "Emma seemed to be a bit of a bully at school. One of her friends divorced his parents, and Emma always stood up for him when other children made fun of him. Today, she stood up for him with her fists." I admit, I smiled at the thought of my brave Emma fighting for her bullied friend. Did she win? Jim, Linda scolded me. One way or another, the teacher summed it all up and came to the conclusion that something was wrong at home. Then she called and warned me that it was affecting Emma. I sighed. I wish you had mentioned this earlier. I know I was going to, but... I looked at her as she stopped. She shrugged. I didn't know how you would react. I wanted to make sure we could talk about this before you just ran off with your, I know what I'm doing attitude. I do know what I'm doing. Jim, she sighed and shook her head with a smile. She's our baby. We have to make sure that what we do won't harm her. My expression must have hardened because before I could say anything, she stopped me. Please don't say that. I raised my hands in surrender and let it go with a deep sigh. Yeah, I'm a stupid fucking adulterous bitch. My right eyebrow went up. And yes, I really believed that I would be able to take Mark, and that you're going to sit here like a little bitch, and be grateful when I return home. She nodded. I'm an idiot. I had no idea who I slept with, and I had no idea how easily you could leave me. Okay? I wasn't sure what to say to all of this, so I shrugged. Fine. But I really believed it, right? I nodded. Yeah. So this was really what I thought would happen. Yeah, I asked suspiciously. Fine, she said cheerfully. So, selfish? Certainly. Silly? Check it out. No respect for you? The same. Intentionally putting my children at risk? She stopped and waited for me. Are you really trying to move on from what you did to our children? She laughed cynically. I won't get away from anything. No, it's my fault, okay? And what should we do about it? Once I had cooled down, we discussed what we would do and planned to discuss it with her tomorrow after school. The next day, Linda and I pulled Emma aside to see how she was feeling. Emma, I take it you hit a bully the other day? I asked her. He was picking on Lloyd. Did he hit Lloyd? No, she said softly. Okay, you know, if he only talked, then you'll have to keep talking. Right? I asked. Yeah, she muttered. Okay, then why don't you tell me why you actually hit him? She looked confused. Because he was picking on Lloyd. She shrugged. Fine. I laughed. Sometimes I forget that she is only 6. I had to ask, why don't you tell me what's really bothering you? She looked scared to say anything. Baby, you're not going to upset me or your mother, I pointed at Linda. It's okay, honey. We just need to talk about what's bothering you. Linda told her. She was silent for a long time. Are you getting a divorce? Why do you think so? I asked, squatting down next to her. She shrugged. You don't touch Mom like you used to. And when Ellen was here, you touched her. I looked at Linda. She squatted down too and pulled Emma closer. Mom broke her promise to Dad. I didn't know how important it was to him. But that's how it was. Because of this, I'm really sorry, honey. But yes, we are getting divorced. Emma started to cry. So we won't. Linda interrupted her. Hey, 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 nothing changes. Fine, nothing changes. She hugged Emma. Dad isn't leaving. No, I laughed. You saw my room. It is filled with furniture. There are pictures of you and Tommy on the walls. Looks like I'm going somewhere. Really? She asked, hugging Linda. Linda pulled away and kissed her forehead. True, darling. The only thing that changes is that Mom has her own room and Dad has his own. Just like you and Tommy, I said. What about Ellen? Will she come? I laughed. I think she still likes having her apartment all to herself. Emma nodded. Good. Fine. I thought you liked her, I asked. Yes, but I don't trust her. She said she could steal my crayons. She said it was primo. We laughed. She did it now? I asked. What is primo? It means very beautiful, and she's right. You have a very nice collection of crayons. Linda smiled. Emma laughed. Linda squeezed her tightly, kissed her again, and then released her. Emma came up to me, and I hugged her too. He kissed her forehead one more time before letting her go. Are you okay now? I asked. She nodded several times. Your mom and I would never do anything to hurt you or your brother. Just let us know if you need to talk about it again, okay? When she nodded, I told her, okay, run. Go and get those crayons you're so proud of. I smiled. Thanks for that, Linda remarked as Emma left. You were right. Of all the nasty things I can accuse you of, deliberately leading us to this is not one of them. A few weeks later, Linda said that our friends wanted to go to Morrison's again that Friday. Ellen and I had been going there the last 3 Fridays, but this weekend we were planning to spend a quiet evening together. I looked at Linda. Why don't you go with them? Jim, she began to wail. No, I'm serious. You haven't gone out for a long time. You need a day off. I don't want to go out. Linda, you can't just go to work and come home to be miserable. You need an evening of rest. Ellen and I were planning a relaxing evening at home. We can stay and watch the kids, and you can finally have some fun. What if? What? I laughed. What if you meet someone? Go for it. You don't owe me this. No, she shook her head. I'm not going to meet anyone. This won't happen. I sighed. I'm not saying you should or what you need, but if it happens, that's fine for me. I'll be here with Ellen, remember? Now she sighed. What should I even wear? The red dress I love. You always looked great in it. She thought for a moment before nodding. Okay, I'll go tell Dee. I was making coffee on Saturday morning when Linda walked into the kitchen in her pajamas. Ellen slept in my room, enjoying the opportunity to get some sleep. The children were not going to get up for a long time. Hi, how was your evening? I asked. Okay, maybe. Did you have fun? She shrugged. It was awkward at first, but yes, it was fun in the end. Meet anyone special? I asked with an insinuating tone. Yes, she replied in a serious tone. Why didn't you tell me you talked to Mark? I shrugged. At first, because what we talked about concerned him personally, and the times when we met in the club after that, I don't know. I think Ellen helped me get rid of most of the rage I felt towards you, and so telling you about it then would seem like an attempt to hurt you. I finished shaking my head. She nodded. Everything is fine. Yes. He apologized for his role in all of this. I told him it was not his fault, but mine, and last night he acted like a gentleman. Well, good. I poured us a cup of coffee. Are you going to repeat it? Maybe, when I need to go out somewhere, you know. The next day, Dee and Dave came to see us. Dave and I were talking in the backyard while our kids played. Oh, I'm dying to tell you about Friday night, he said. Why such delight? Linda said Mark was there, but pretended everything was pretty calm. No, I mean Linda. Well, I'll just tell you. We had been trying to get Linda to dance for an hour. She looked great, but at the same time she looked like she was ready to go, you know? One moment I was trying to figure out how to help, and the next I saw Mark behind her. Linda, he said. She turned to look at him, and as soon as she recognized him, she screamed, "No!" and jerked back sharply on the stool. We all started scolding him for all the trouble he caused, and I saw him raise his hands before he started talking over all of us. I came to apologize. We, of course, immediately calmed down, feeling like complete idiots for being angry with him. Linda, I just wanted to say how sorry I am for what I did. She had already calmed down by then. It's not your fault, Mark, it's mine. I did it. Is there anything I can do to help? No, she laughed. I just need to wallow in my sadness. She smiled faintly. Mark shook his head. I spoke to Jim a few weeks ago. This caught her attention, and he didn't seem like the kind of person who would want you to feel that way. She laughed cynically. Didn't you hear? I'm a selfish bitch. I don't care what Jim wants. I want to feel like this. I deserve it after what I put him through. Mark shook his head. You need someone to lean on. Linda just let out an evil laugh. Mark sighed. It doesn't have to be sex. Hell, it doesn't have to be me. But Jim has Ellen, and who do you have? She looked at him intently. I have no one. And it will be like this until we get through this. So you're just going to feel terrible. For how long? Until I can get him back. I think we all made some noise of disbelief at her words. We didn't want this. Her words simply surprised us. Or at least until I can go a week without hearing him cry in my room. Is Jim crying? Commented some idiot who was eavesdropping on our conversation. We all looked at him, but it was too late. Yes, Linda answered the guy angrily. Yes, Jim is crying. Then she stood up and walked a few steps away from the table. Did you heard this? Jim is crying, she shouted to the whole club. Your hero is mourning the death of his marriage. She pointed to her chest with both hands. I did it, the two-faced, corrupt bitch who broke your hero's heart, and I deserve to feel like the pathetic piece of crap that I am. But I will humiliate myself. I'll disgrace myself. I will do whatever it takes to get him back. Then she turned to us. Is that clear, Mark? Mark looked calm and caring for her, but raised his hands in submission. Linda wiped the tears from her eyes, returned and sat down in her seat. The band was just about to start playing, but the leader spoke first. Personally, I like to know that our hero can still deal with his emotions. And I think he wouldn't want you to suffer too much, miss. I hope it doesn't hurt you, but this song is for Jim. And then the guitarist started playing the opening riffs of Ted Nugent's Stranglehold. Linda laughed. He loves this song. Then let's dance to this, Mark said. No, she looked at him coldly. What if we all dance to this? He asked, looking around us. You can do this, right? And we all started pestering her until she came out on the dance floor with us. How was the rest of the evening? I asked. Very good, Dave commented. Once she came out and allowed herself to live a little, everything became normal. It was almost like bringing back the old Linda, you know. I nodded. A few hours later, Dave and Dee said goodbye. We saw them off before returning to the kitchen. Linda took a soda from the refrigerator. Do you want anything? She asked. No, I just wanted to talk to you for a minute. She leaned over the refrigerator and simply lowered her head, sighing heavily. How much did he tell you? She asked, closing the refrigerator and approaching the table. Most of it, I think. She nodded in response, opening a can of soda. He definitely told me about your rant. She took a sip before saying, I honestly feel like it was more like a speech. This really made me laugh. I shook my head. Linda, after everything we've been through, you know that I never. No, she didn't exactly scream. She shook her head. There are a lot of really terrible things you could say to me, and I deserve it all. She nodded. But you cannot tell me that I will never be yours again. She shook her head at me. I know you're still sick, but you're not allowed to take away the only ray of hope I have. Linda, I sighed, that won't happen. You don't know that. You always say you can't see the future. You can only deal with the present. Well, you can't see the future, so you can't say never. I rubbed my face. Linda, our marriage is dead. I pointed between us. It's dead. It's not dead. She shook her head. You still love me. No. She nodded. Let's see. Months passed. Ellen became a frequent visitor to the house, and we started inviting Linda to go out with us about once a month. About 4 months later, when everything had settled into a normal rhythm for us, I received documents from LU. I read them before taking them to Linda. What is this? She asked. Documents from LU, I said calmly. This surprised her a little. She nodded. Have you read them? Yes. She extended her hand, and I handed her the papers. She cleared her throat before starting to read. When she finished, she looked at me and nodded, passing them back. I love you, she said. I laughed. I wish I could believe it. She licked her lips. What can I do to make you trust me? I just shrugged and shook my head. There has to be something, right? I did something to destroy us. There must be something I can do to fix this. Linda, everything is dead. She shook her head softly. Making something is always more difficult than destroying it. It was easy to destroy it. Breathe life into it. I shook my head, grinning. Everything is dead. I don't love you. She nodded several times before saying, I don't know how long we had sex. It seemed like it was an eternity. Mark is a great lover. It was like I was the instrument, and he was the virtuoso, and he was great. With Mom. I grabbed her shirt with both hands and slammed it against the refrigerator. She gasped as her head bounced away from him. I held her up a foot off the floor. Shut your fucking mouth, or I'll rip your throat out, I growled. The bitch grinned at me. I know, she whispered. I don't care what you think about sex. No one is famous and claims the sex was mediocre. So I don't give a damn how good you think he was, you nasty bitch. She placed her hands on my face while I held her in a death grip. I'm so sorry I caused you all this pain. She shook her head. If I could go back and change everything, I would do it. Even if I had to still feel these feelings, I would do it to save you from this crap. I shook my head at her. I hurt you terribly. She shook her head and gave a painful smile until the tears began to flow. Without the slightest thought, what kind of bastard does this? I realized that I could hear children walking down the corridor. It's almost time for family TV watching. I put Linda down and smoothed out her shirt. But all this rage, she said, it comes from that pain, from the love that you still feel for me. When I realized that she almost provoked me to kill her just to prove a point, I said, You're crazy, I whispered. After all the crap I've done, maybe I'm just focused. Daddy, are you going to kiss Mommy? Emma asked. No, baby, I'm in a relationship with Ellen, and I'm not doing this, I said, not taking my eyes off my crazy ex-wife. Oh, you're just standing really close to each other. Linda said, We just wanted to talk, and we didn't want you to hear it. She smiled as she walked around me and smacked Emma on the bottom. Well, what are we going to watch? Blue Y, the children shouted. I laughed as I walked with them into the living room. If I see another episode of Blue Y, I'll shoot someone. Avatar, The Last Airbender, Linda asked, addressing everyone. This drew several nods. She picked up the remote as we sat down on the couch and played the episode we were on before looking at me. It's not dead. This made me chuckle lightly, and I shook my head in disbelief. A month later, I was standing in the kitchen when she came in with some papers. What is this? I asked. My HIV results. The way she said it, I suddenly turned around to face her, feeling my heart skip a beat and almost losing my balance. I'm clean, she said. I put my hands on the countertop and tried to catch my breath. Damn you, I managed. Sorry. I looked at her, but she didn't laugh. To be honest, she looked worried. I didn't mean for it to sound like that. I'm sorry I scared you. Yes. I nodded several times. It's okay, I said calmly, trying to calm my racing heart. A couple of months later, we were in the kitchen clearing away the dishes after dinner. You know, it's really your fault that I slept with Mark, Linda commented, handing me the cup to dry. I raised my eyebrows and rolled my eyes. She looked at me. You've been telling me for years that I'm the most beautiful woman in the room, that you are ready to do anything for me, that you will always love me, that you need me to be whole. I remembered all this, repeating it to her again and again. I crossed my arms and leaned against the countertop, waiting for the moment when I could dispel this crap. A good woman would treasure this. I would keep it to myself. She narrowed her eyes. Then she shook her head, almost with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry I wasn't a good woman, Jim. I pulled her towards me and kissed her temple while she cried. About 2 months later, Ellen snuggled up to me in bed. She had been spending more time at our house than in her apartment for some time. I thought about asking her to move in. I was offered a job at Yale. Crap. Yes. Any chance you've changed your mind about this? I asked. Do you want me to stay? Yes. She laughed. Do you need me to stay? I looked at her lying on my chest. The night light softened her already beautiful features, making her a truly elven beauty. Do you need this to be happy? I asked. Her eyes rose to look at me. Yes, she nodded. Sorry. I nodded and kissed her. You could have made me stay, she said, and I could make you happy. For a while. She nodded again. But eventually you would start to feel dissatisfied. She nodded again. Especially when I get you pregnant. She laughed out loud. Shut up. Then she kissed me again. How much time do we have? 2 months. Fine. Let's make them unforgettable, I said. I felt her start to purr. Linda actually looked sad that Ellen was leaving. The children weren't pretending, they really became attached to her. She got the news 10 months into our relationship, and her flight was scheduled to depart the day after Valentine's Day. Well, we just couldn't help but do it. We gave her a send-off at Morrison's. All our friends were there. We drank, we danced, we ordered food from the best local BBQ restaurant. Then we went to the Four Seasons Hotel where we made love all night. When I brought her on the plane, she was exhausted. You'll sleep the whole flight, right? I laughed. Yeah, she smiled. Then she became serious. I'll miss you. Same thing, I smiled. I love you. She smiled even wider. Same thing, she whispered before giving me a deep, sensual kiss. Then she looked at me. I won't be mad when I find out you only lasted 30 minutes before starting a new relationship. I laughed. It happened once. I nodded. I'm not going to look for another woman for a long time. She shook her head with a smile. God, what a dumbass you are. Then she kissed me again. It's a pity that I'm not weak enough to stay. Yes, me too, I laughed. Then they announced boarding for her flight. We kissed again and said, I love you to each other. And then she got on the plane, and it drove away from the gate, and my Ellen left. The walk back home was quiet, gloomy, and terrible. I locked the front door behind me and headed to the kitchen. Linda was in a robe and making coffee. She raised her head when I entered and stood up from the table. Are you okay? She asked. Yeah, just sad. Sit down, I'll pour you some coffee. Do we have anything stronger? I asked, sitting down. No alcohol, mate. I have Bailey's for coffee. I noticed that she had already taken it out. She saw me look at the bottle while pouring my coffee. I know. The only thing you ever liked from Godova was their coffee liqueurs. So of course they stopped making them, I laughed. Linda smiled and nodded, then brought me a cup. Thank you, I said. You're welcome, she smiled, sitting back down in her seat. You know, I really liked Ellen. I looked at her, slightly incredulous. Don't do that, she said with a small smile and shook her head. She was nice. I nodded and took a sip of coffee. Well, we still have Facebook, I smiled. Oh yes, almost like the real thing. While we were drinking coffee, I couldn't help but notice that she kept looking at me. What? I asked. She took a deep breath before standing up and throwing off her robe. She was completely naked underneath. She approached me, crossing the small distance between us. I want a second chance. Her plane hasn't landed yet, I said incredulously. Ellen is not stupid, Jim. She knew what would happen as soon as she left. And then I realized what Ellen meant. The airport is only 30 minutes from my house. I shook my head. I never promised you a second chance. She squatted down and put both hands on my thing. I've been a good little bitch for a year. She shrugged. That seems fair after I thought you'd be my bitch for the night. I nodded and took a sip of coffee. I did everything you asked me to do, said everything you needed to say, all to show you that Will, never I'll let you down again. I love you. I laughed cynically. You know I love you. I refused to move on because I couldn't imagine myself trying to feel better and forget while you were still hurt. You love me. Now I laughed. She was confused. I saw it. She said, what brought her too comical shook his head at me. Take me back. Take me. And let's put this horrible year behind. I set the cup down and leaned a few inches away from her face, and he said in his cruelest voice, "What are you going to do when I tell you that you're a soul-stealing bitch who doesn't deserve a second chance?" She looked like I had physically hit her. Her eyes closed as she moaned. It took her a moment to open her eyes, and she seemed to be losing the fight to hold back the tears. "It's all true," she said with a slight nod. "So I would put the robe back on. I go to my room to cry, and I will still support you through your next girlfriend, wife, or whatever. And I pray to God that your last question was a bluff." I leaned a little closer and said in the same voice, "You're a soul-stealing bitch who doesn't deserve a second chance. I don't think I can ever forgive you." The tears were flowing heavily now, but she nodded several times before standing up and returning to her chair. She put her robe back on and buttoned it, turning away from me. I saw her wipe away her tears and try to get her emotions under control. "Are you hungry? The kids and I didn't finish the lasagna. There are a few pieces left." When she asked, she wiped her eyes with a kitchen towel. I stood up and walked over to her. She turned around just in time to see me and start backing away. She pressed her hands to my chest in a weak attempt to stop me. I pulled her towards me and kissed her. She moaned and wrapped her arms around my neck. She kissed me as if I had breathed life into her. She wrapped her legs around me, and I laid her on the table. I tore off her robe while she tore the fly of my trousers. Sex with Linda used to be gentle and soft. We made love, and it was very sweet and satisfying. I think we're done with that shit now. I laughed evilly when I saw her trying to stay awake. She growled at me before pulling me into a deep kiss. "I don't take pills anymore," she whispered. The poor girl was covered in sweat and breathing heavily. She couldn't even lift her head to look at me, as if she was begging the ceiling. I picked her up and carried her to my room. Early this morning, I woke up to Linda running her finger over my heart like a lovesick teenager. She must have sensed that I was watching her, because a moment later she turned her gaze to me and smiled. I kissed her deeply. "What did you mean? You didn't care how good I was. Did you have sex with Mark?" I chuckled. "Well, that was illogical. Most sexual intercourse happens in the head. So you dream and expect that sex will be the best of your life. The implication was that unless he really sucks, it will be the best sex you've ever had." "Do you like sex with Ellen?" "Actually, yes. I wanted great sex, and I had it." I shrugged. "So I made it big in my mind." "Probably." She chewed her lip for a moment. "Is sex better with me than with Ellen?" "Now?" She nodded. "You'll never be able to tell her that." She smiled and nodded again. "Yes, sex with Ellen was very enjoyable, very loving and caring. But what we did last night was, yeah," she sighed and smiled. "What was sex like with Mark?" She thought for a moment. "He was in control, just like you were last night. But with him, it was like I was on an instrument, and he was playing me. With you, it was, as if you were my master, and I needed to serve you." "And was sex with me better than with Mark?" She raised her right eyebrow and shrugged at me. "Eh." My alarm went off. I hate having children. I mean, they're cute and all, but they are like pets that need a lot more supervision, and they are constantly trying to kill themselves. "Do we have an hour?" Linda moaned as she lay partially underneath me. "Yeah," I said as I turned left towards her, realizing that we were still connected. "Are you ready to take a shower before we have to make breakfast for these little nightmares?" I asked. "Yeah," she said in a strange tone. I grinned and kissed her. Then he slowly pulled away from her. I walked over to my dresser and put on my underwear before wrapping Linda in the blanket. In case the children wake up early, I carried her into the master bathroom and helped her shower. We had eggs, bacon, and toast. Not innovative, but healthy and nutritious. We ended up sitting on the couch and letting the kids pick the show. I looked back and saw Linda just smiling as she watched our kids enjoying the show. I looked at Linda and we both laughed. Some things never change. I ruffled his hair to his annoyance and Linda kissed the top of his head. Then she looked at me and said, "I love you," satisfied tone. "I believe you." I nodded. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.